Okay, so if you attend the CDDP course, then all will become clear. But the basic principle of demand-driven MRP is your buffers are sized based on the average usage and the lead time of the component. So your buffers are red, yellow, and green, and the yellow zone is defined as your average usage multiplied by your lead time. So the longer your lead time, the larger your yellow zone will be, which is going to trigger your replenishment level. Simple put.
I'll add on that is that when you have a long lead time part, traditionally what we do is we like to order one big batch to cover us over the lead time. And what the DDMRP engine will do is it'll drive you to make orders for smaller batches more frequently. So rather than making one batch, because that's what we typically do, it's better to order for flow smaller batches more frequently, so that way you can also react better when you have something that increases the demand for that part, because you've already got several orders in the pipeline waiting to come in.
I think that I would add to that by saying that it really relies on whether the item is something that you're going to sell every single week or something that you don't see very frequently. If it's going to be something that you see every single week and that you want to keep in stock, then yes, you could set up some sort of a sort of inventory buffer format. You might want to use a different rule, like a sort of rate-based rule, if it's something which is going to be ordered in a sort of cyclic way. If it is a product that you don't see very frequently, then you might not want to stock it. So then you might need to actually sort of make that to forecast, or actually buy that to forecast, or build in some other way of actually bringing sort of in that part. So it really depends on where it sits in terms of its volume and variability. So where it sits within that picture. I think that's what I would add to what's been said.
Well, and I'd like to build on that all depends on how you build out your demand-driven operating model. If you have a part that's got regular usage, then it's a good candidate to be considered for stocking. And as you said, if it's not, it may not be a logical stock position. Not all parts are stocked. So it could be also traded as a strategic part that's non-stocked. So that operates according to different rules. So that's the first P, is that's the positioning. So that's all considered in the definition of the operating model.
Right. I want to add to that. All very good comments. You could also think about decoupling your lead time to that offshore supplier. In other words, have a shipping buffer so that all you have to do is the transportation lead time into your factory, your plant, wherever you're sourcing the material into, allowing them to decouple. You get a little better response. You can chop that lead time up into bits doing that. You get a little more responsiveness out of the process as well.
So what we see is the design of the operating model, as we just stated a few minutes ago, is really key in understanding how to design your operating model for these parts. This is the key to the solution.
Yeah, just to add on what Eric was saying there, by putting that shipping buffer in place closer to where the point of use is, that also protects your operation, your entry point operation, a little bit from the vacancies, or might not just be long lead time, but long lead time items very often have a high degree of variability attached to them as well, because of the long lead times there are. Particularly if you've got something coming on the ocean, you have a hurricane in the middle of the Pacific, you've got a problem. So by having that shipping buffer placed closer to the point of use, it allows you to put it, but it's not a full buffer in the sense of the entire lead time protected, but it gives you a bit of a cushion to protect you from the variability of the lead time from the suppliers you've got as well. So there's a number of ways, as Patrick said, it is all about positioning, and Carol said it's all about how you position, and it's that step one, where are we going to position our strategic buffers, and what are we going to stock and what's not going to be stocked. That's the first step of the design, and then so you get that wrong, then you still get some results, but not necessarily this kind of results but that's the potential. So it's worth investing a high degree of time in understanding what your supply chain is, understanding all the variabilities and how all the various linkages happen, and then from there you can build that model of where you're going to hold stock.
They kind of define their own level anyway, so I'm not too concerned about that. What we see with steady running consumer goods, especially when you see this, is the real challenge we're going to have to deal with are promotional periods, which inevitably are going to come, where the company is going to go into push mode for some period of time. a sporting event around which you're going to send end caps to your retail chain. You're going to have special packaging for like the Super Bowl in the U.S. or something like that, which is coming up this weekend. And so you'll need to pre-build for those kind of events. We saw a lot of that at Unilever. And you'll have to do some leveling in that kind of context. But what we also see is that on the other periods, you can pretty much go on autopilot. The rate of consumption is fairly predictable. Unilever used to talk about the 6-pack of Dove soap, which was such a steady runner in the POS arena, the point of sale. And yet they saw all these distortions because of how they were managing it, both in shipping and production and things like that. So if you align your model correctly, you'll be able to have a nice, predictable production environment, and then use adjustments to the buffer pre-building to directly address those promotional periods.
The answer is yes. I think that there are certain items where the variability is extremely low. The volumes are very, very good. And there is a rule that we would call the rate-based rule, where essentially you are setting the inventory level for the variability part only. Because what you're saying is we're going to supply at the same rate as we're actually going to be selling at. So we find that that actually enables you to take the inventories down even further and still get the same levels of service. So you're taking out of your buffer the part that is there for the response time, because you don't actually, because in working out the buffer, you don't need to think about that part. You're just simply going to ship at the same rate as you sell. So yes, absolutely.
So this would be for very, very high volume and very low variability parts.
Exactly.
Just make it clear this more the exception than the...
Yes, but they, in terms of when you look at what the spread of what businesses sell, they can represent a very high volume, because the volumes on these things are really, really big. So it's something which you should, sort of think about. And it's something that I don't think has been done very successfully. So there's a big
And I
opportunity.
take it back to that it all goes back to step one, which is positioning, which is how you design the demand-driven operating model.
What can happen if we introduce and implement DDMRP, DDSNOP, and the adaptive SNOP only in one part of the supply chain network or the supply chain web? So basically, just one section of the entire business. Is this a viable option? How would that work? I think it depends if you cut it horizontally or vertically.
Exactly. It all comes down to how is it configured. If it shares capacity, material, space, and configuration with another part of the company, you're asking for disaster, because you're going to have conflicts running all over the place. If it's a separate plant division that operates on its own, that's great. It's just take a node, and do that. Depends on if it's, part of the global configuration. Is it regional? Is it, there's a lot to, it depends. So if you're going to try to do it as part of a plant, it's a disaster. If it's the whole plant, hey, have at it. I think it'd be a great idea.
So, sometimes some of the first implementation or pilots, they just take like the distribution network or a part of the network at the very start.
I haven't asked that question, but as you read it, I thought about it. In my organization, pharmaceuticals, we make finished products where there is the logic of establishing smart buffers somewhere and run late-stage customization or concepts like that, which are very much what we are talking about today. And then there are API manufacturers or chemicals, right, which are classical batch processes. There is no buffer in there. Those processes have to run through batch by batch. And for that part of the organization, I could not imagine this to be, very feasible or useful. But maybe you have better answers to that one.
So my background is 15 years in pharmaceutical, and one of the first things I thought of when we started exploring DDMRP is, could we use that to link the pharmaceutical, the manufacturing, so the tableting, the bulk, with the API manufacturing, and they started running simulation and design for that. And you can, believe me, you can. For API, you can actually have your API replenished based on buffer status, even with very long time, even with campaigns, like 2-3 campaigns a year, based on replenishment signal from an API buffer. It works.
Works beautifully, and actually what it does is enable something that John worked on much earlier in his career, called rhythm wheel scheduling. It allows you to sequence those chemicals in that heavy process so that you're always running those chemicals in the correct sequence. So rhythm wheel scheduling, I always want to run them A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because if I have to break it and run an A after I get done with a D, I got a major cleanout. This is the advantage of having demand driven, is because what it does is it stabilizes the schedule to the actual process plant. So it's a question of produce the batch or not, and it's stabilizing that sequence. So we see it all the time. It's very common, it works very well, it's incredibly elegant, and it's an enabler for something that John worked on with Snitch on. Very early on in his career with, it's called rhythm wheel planning.
Yeah, just to, I mean, the two go hand in hand, so beautifully it's untrue. Because what you're doing is you're getting a clear signal, an unchanging signal, which allows you, particularly on the things which are campaigned, where you have to understand what you need to make well in advance of when you're actually going to make it. To be able to say that's been locked down, our buffers are stable, we've got the signal coming from the buffer to say within this campaign period we do need to make or we don't need to make, and it tells us either a make or skip signal on the rhythm to the manufacturer, irrespective of whether they're making bolts or whether they're making API. It's just a matter of timing. And also it gives you the quantity, which then allows you know the quantity you're going to need to be able to replenish that raw material, which then allows you to then take your API plant and understand exactly when you need to do your changeovers, how much you need to make, schedule that into your batching process and ensure you're making the right numbers of batches of each API. So yes, the two go very, very well together and do work.